There are a lot of things in the anime world that people just seem to not be able to agree upon, and I usually tend to avoid these topics, especially if there's not a true right answer. But one of these topics has been weighing a little heavily on my mind recently, and I figured, well, I know enough about the show that I can make an informed opinion that may be correct here, and some of the opinions that I say you may not agree with, and that's totally fine. That's human nature. I think it's actually important for both of us to realize that a difference of opinion is important. You shouldn't become the hollow echo of an opinion you heard from somebody you respect, but maybe use the information and knowledge that I have access to inform opinion of your own. So with no further ado, let's get into the Otsutsukis ranked and explained. But before we start ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And since we're talking about ranking and explaining, why don't you go ahead and explain to me why you haven't followed what's soon to be the #1 gaming channel on YouTube? That's right, it's NC Gamer 23. But for real though, if you want more NC Gamer 23 content, go ahead and follow that page at the Playing Video Games. So, the Otsutsukis, ranking them is somewhat controversial for a reason. In most situations of power ranking within the same universe, most people tend to agree. Most people hold the same regard of the Hashira's strength and the Phantom Troop's strength and the Akatsuki's strength, or maybe sometimes they'll fight, or the mangaka will tell us this person is the strongest, this person is the weakest. But the problem is with the Otsutsukis is that there is a lot of very conflicting data. Most of the information we know is either conflicting or non-absolute, or is left heavily up to interpretation. So while some lists of the Otsutsukis ranked by strength may look very similar, there's a lot of variance, at least as far as power ranking groups in anime goes. I feel like I need to add the caveat here that I'm only going to be talking about people whose last name is Otsutsuki, which means I'm not going to be including Jubidara or Jubito to the list. They're not Otsutsukis, they were just 10-tailed Jinchurikis. So with all of our preamble done, let's get to ranking and explaining. Fortunately, the bottom of this list is pretty well agreed upon. Well, it's actually not necessarily true. It's actually not agreed upon at all. It depends on who you're looking at. But I personally believe that the weakest members of the Otsutsuki were Indra and Ashura Otsutsuki. Now, the reason that this is a somewhat controversial take is because there's not a whole lot of information on the strength of Indra and Ashura. Yes, we've seen them fight each other, but we really haven't seen them fight against an Otsutsuki level threat. I mean, Indra and Ashura could be insanely powerful. We just don't have enough information on them to make that assertion. So the real question becomes, which of these two is stronger? Well, Indra was the firstborn of Hagoromo, and while he was originally thought to be the proper inheritor of his father's teaching because he was so talented when he was born, as time progressed, things changed. You see, Indra wasn't always a hateful person. In fact, in his childhood, even after his mother was killed giving birth to Ashura, he was a peaceful and loving kid. Hagoromo wanted either Indra or Ashura to be his predecessor in the great sagedom. So Hagoromo taught both of them ninjutsu, which is essentially half of ninjutsu. Essentially, in order to mold chakra to create ninjutsu, you need to combine your physical strength with your spiritual strength. Ninjutsu is only spiritual strength. But since we're talking about ninjutsu, we should talk about its origins. While learning ninjutsu, Indra actually realized how to apply his physical strength to ninjutsu and mold ninjutsu. And this had people super interested because now ninjutsu could be used to make life easier around the village. And in the beginning, that's what ninjutsu was used for. Lighting fires, collecting water, those kinds of things. You see, ninjutsu is just being tapped into the spiritual plane of the world. But as time progressed, Indra realized that people were focusing more on the physical strength building than the spiritual prowess that was necessary for ninjutsu. And this irked him because he realized it was largely important to focus on your spiritual power by meditating or practicing. And this pet peeve grew larger when Black Zetsu would continually approach him about the fact that he was so talented in creating ninjutsu that one day he'll probably surpass the Sage of Six Paths himself. This got worse once he awoke in his Sharingan, and he began to take heed to the words Black Zetsu was saying. This led Indra to become more closed off, more isolationist as he focused on getting himself stronger. And as Ashura and Indra both reached an age where they could take over for Hagoromo, Hagoromo assigned them a mission. Both of them were assigned to help a foreign land that needed reviving. When Indra got to his foreign land, he realized that the land was actually very fertile, but there was a god tree sapling that was killing all of the farmers. So Indra used his Sharingan on everybody in the village and made them destroy the sapling and discover water. And he was back in like a week. Now Ashura had been gone for years, trying to revive this infertile land. But when Ashura returned, he brought a lot of people with him. You see, because Ashura had collaborated with the locals in order to create fertile land. while Indra had just used control. This led Hagoromo to the decision that Ashura should in fact be the inheritor of his will. This flew Indra into a rage that was stoked by the words that Black Zetsu was whispering into his ear. So Indra was basically like, it's wartime now, and killed his two closest friends to awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan. He then, on the night of the celebration of Ashura's rise to the next great sage, attacked the village. He attacked the village with his brand new complete Susanoo, which Ashura, to his surprise, was actually able to repel. You see, Ashura had also gotten stronger in the years he had been away, and he had also just received all of his father's power. During their fight, Ashura seems to get pushed into a corner. Hagoromo tells all of the village to give Ashura their chakra like Goku summoning the Spirit Bomb, and eventually Ashura is able to awaken to Wood Release, and he uses that to defeat Indra. Now, this is enough to make you say that Indra is clearly the weaker of the two, and you're probably right, he is, except for the fact that Ashura was being powered by an entire village as it happened. But the fact that in almost every single generation of Indra and Ashura reincarnates, the Ashura reincarnate wins whenever they fight. Hagoromo beats Madara, Naruto beats Sasuke. It's probably safe to assume that Ashura is actually stronger. Now, the real question becomes, is Ashura stronger than Naruto? And if Ashura is stronger than Naruto, then should he be higher than some of the full-blooded Otsutsukis on this list that Naruto beats in a fight? And while Ashura obviously has Sage of Six Paths chakra, just like Naruto does, while Naruto was fighting all of the Otsutsuki he was fighting, he also had Kurama. That in combination with the fact that we've only ever really seen Ashura use what is sort of a Rasengan in Wood Release makes me believe that he's somewhere in the region of Hashirama. Obviously a bit stronger because of the Sage of Six Paths chakra, but not quite as strong as Naruto. The same thing could be said for Indra. I don't believe he's as strong as Sasuke, mostly on account of the Rinnegan. As for their abilities, they're just your standard Senju or your standard Uchiha. So that's why they round out the bottom of this list. But enough talking about Hagoromo's descendants, let's talk about Hagoromo's brother's descendants, specifically the only one left alive, Toneri. You see, this to me is where the real ranking begins, which I guess is a bit odd because Toneri is just the spin-off of Hamura in the way that Indra and Ashura were spins off of Hagoromo, but he's got the white hair and the white skin and all of that, so I feel like he's more Otsutsuki than they were, which is weird considering he's way more generations removed from Hamura than Indra and Ashura or Hagoromo. It's extra weird when we consider the fact that Hamura didn't bring Otsutsukis with him to the moon, he just brought regular people from Earth who like happened to follow him. When you see a picture of Hamura on the moon for the first time, it's just a bunch of humans behind him. So as to why Indra and Ashura look like humans while Toneri looks like an Otsutsuki, I simply do not know. Regardless, Toneri is stronger than both Indra and Ashura. Indra, for those of you who don't know, is the last remnant of Hamura's bloodline. Essentially, after Hamura and Hagoromo sealed Kaguya in the moon, Hamura was sent to the moon to keep an eye on Kaguya. And he was like, well, I don't want to live on the moon alone, so he brought a bunch of people. Hagoromo awoke the Rinnegan later in his life, and Hamura awoke the Tenseigan. You see, the Tenseigan is a powered-up Byakugan that only Otsutsuki members have access to, and Hamura wanted to use this Tenseigan to keep an eye over Hagoromo's Earth. Essentially, Hamura just wanted to make sure that Hagoromo fulfilled his will of imparting chakra and peace to the Earth. But unfortunately, one day Hamura died, leaving just the people he had brought to the moon. And as time went on, this population split into two factions. People who believed that because of the rampant war on Earth that Hagoromo's will had not been imparted to the world and thus humans should be wiped out, and people who were like, how about we just let them chill? Unfortunately, the genocide faction won, but eventually they died out and left only Toneri. But here's the thing, Toneri has some abilities on him. Toneri can create a green orb that he can use for a lot of different abilities. He can use it to read minds or absorb chakra from people from far away, or even just have it explode. He can also communicate with people from afar by projecting his consciousness or entering their dreams. But Toneri had his eyes taken from him as a child, which means he has to perceive the world through sense. But this sense is so intense that he can sense things on the Earth from the moon. But Toneri doesn't stay blind for long. You see, Toneri actually steals Hanabi's eyes, Hanabi being Hinata's little sister. But the thing is, if you implant a Hyuga's Byakugan into an Otsutsuki, it awakens to a Tenseigan. And with the Tenseigan, Toneri was a match for Naruto. In fact, with the Tenseigan, he was able to control repulsive and attractive forces, just like a Rinnegan, except a lot stronger than a Rinnegan. Because with this Tenseigan, he was going to throw the moon at the Earth. And while with the Rinnegan you can throw meteors, it's not the moon. He also gets access to a thing called the Tenseigan Chakra Cloak, which increases his speed, durability, and strength on top of giving him Truth Seeker orbs. On top of this, in this mode, he was able to literally cut the moon in half with a chakra beam. And in this mode, he said he would be able to survive the Earth's collision with the moon, giving him planetary level durability. Oh God, this is awkward. I can't believe I forgot this. I forgot Urashiki Urashiki, probably because he doesn't technically exist in the manga. Yeah, no, Urashiki is not stronger than Toneri. And I know what you're saying, but Urashiki beat Toneri in a fight. First off, no he didn't. At least not a full-powered Toneri. Urashiki stopped by the moon when him, Momoshiki, and Kinshiki were heading to Earth. He basically pulled up on Toneri and was like, hey, I heard what happened with the Hyugas. That's a tough look, bud. Also, the fact that you wanted to destroy Earth when we still need to collect the chakra fruit from there is technically you moving against the clan. So Urashiki essentially hits Toneri with his fishing rod and freezes him for 10,000 years. So you'd be like, oh yeah, of course, Toneri lost. That's Toneri with no eyes. You give Toneri the Tenseigan, he is absolutely running Urashiki's fade. Well, this is gonna be out of order now, but let's cover Urashiki and why he loses to Toneri. Urashiki is an anime-only character in Boruto, and let's not get it twisted, he is powerful. Urashiki actually has a very interesting ability. Urashiki essentially has a chakra fishing rod that he can use to sling through incredibly strong defenses and steal chakra from people. He then stores this chakra in a gourd that he can reach into later and eat. Should he eat, let's say, Gaara's chakra, he can then use magnet release. If he eats Kurama's chakra, he could up his healing factor. And because of this, he technically has unlimited abilities. On top of this, he actually had puppets that he could control without chakra threads and from vast distances away. And towards the end of his life, he enters a transform state, a lot like Momoshiki. And in this form, he can generate black receivers and do massive chakra blasts. But his biggest ability comes in the form of his Rinnegan. More in the fact that he can change his Rinnegan to basically whatever he wants. You see, he has his 6-tome red Rinnegan, very similar to Sasuke's, which allows him to use a move called Yametsu Hirasaka. This is a space-time ninjutsu that allows him to travel between dimensions, a bit like Kaguya's ability. He can also turn his Rinnegan to a blue one, and this is also a space-time ninjutsu that allows him to warp back time a couple of seconds, which makes him seem like he can see into the future. Essentially, let's say you're about to punch me, I can warp back to when your hand was here, I'll know exactly where you're going, and I can dodge it. And while these abilities are cool, there's one problem. Urashiki lost to Genin Naruto, Genin Boruto, and Jiraiya. Now, losing to Jiraiya is no small feat. And technically, Sasuke was there as well, even though he was incredibly chakra depleted. But at the end of the day, he basically lost to Genin Naruto and Genin Boruto. Toneri cut the moon in half and ran the ones with Naruto in his strongest form, outside of Baryon mode, obviously. Even if you say that Toneri doesn't have a hard counter for Urashiki's ability to change time, the difference in speed and power is ridiculous. Now, Urashiki seemed like he was going to be intimidating earlier on in the series. When they were talking about Otsutsukis that Kaguya would be afraid of coming to Earth, he was one of the silhouettes. But when you lose to two Genin, a dude who already died, and a depleted Sasuke, it's just tough to say you're going to be one of the strongest. Okay, so now to clear up some confusion, we are now going Indra, Ashura, Urashiki, Toneri. And since we're talking about Toneri, it makes sense that the next person on the list would be somebody who essentially has Toneri's whole kit, but did it a bit better. Hamura. You see, Hamura's whole thing was the fact that he had the Tenseigan. He didn't get the Tenseigan until much later in his life when he ascended to the moon, but the fact that you get it at all is still saying a lot. Hamura is also the first person on this list who has actual fighting experience against other Otsutsukis. Hamura and Hagoromo fought Kaguya, their mother, for months until they were able to seal her, meaning that Hamura is almost relative to Kaguya. Obviously, this feels like a bit of a stretch because it was a 2-on-1 and Hagoromo is the more powerful out of the two, but the fact that he could bang with Kaguya, who did eat the chakra fruit of Earth, means a lot in terms of his strength. You see, Hamura and Hagoromo were the first people ever born with chakra on Earth. But here's the thing, Kaguya didn't know that they were going to be born with chakra, and Kaguya wanted all of the chakra to the Earth to herself. So when Kaguya had two kids who had chakra, she reverted back to the Ten Tails. Because back in the OG days of Naruto Shippuden, a god tree seed would have to fall off a comet onto a planet, and then Otsutsukis would travel to the planets where these seeds fell off, and then they would eat the chakra fruit of this god tree. So the story that we got was Kaguya descended down to Earth in order to chase this god tree, when in reality what actually happened was more likely than not Kaguya jumped Ishiki and then used his legs to grow the Ten Tails that they brought to Earth into a god tree, is at least the conventionally accepted theory. The only problem is the betrayal of the Otsutsuki clan by tearing Ishiki in half means that the Otsutsuki clan was going to be looking for Kaguya. So Kaguya started to formulate an army, but while she was doing this, she fell in love with a man named Tenchi, who apparently had some swimmers on him so strong that he could knock up an alien, and boom, two babies. So now we have two fraternal twins born with chakra. So by the time that Hamura and Hagoromo grew up, Kaguya had already eaten the chakra fruit, and she had technically already put a large swath of the world in Infinite Tsukiyomi, which is how she got her first army of white Zetsu. But the thing is, Hamura and Hagoromo didn't know about any of this. And for a large part of their childhood, they just grew up without knowing that their mother was kind of evil. Until Gamamaru, the first great Toad Sage, reached out to Hagoromo. Gamamaru is the one who can predict the future and told Jiraiya he would find the child of prophecy. Yeah, he's been around since Hagoromo. Technically, he was the one who taught Hagoromo Toad Sage mode. Hagoromo went to Gamamaru to learn under him because they found out what Kaguya was doing. The only problem is when Hagoromo went to train under Gamamaru, Hamura was abducted by Kaguya. And while Hagoromo was training with Gamamaru, Hamura was being brainwashed by Kaguya. But Hagoromo actually struck down Hamura. In the act of striking down Hamura actually awoken his MS and his Rinnegan. He then healed Hamura with a special tag given to him by Gamamaru, and Hamura and Hagoromo began their months-long battle against Kaguya, and eventually sealed Kaguya as the Ten Tails into Hagoromo, who later used creation of all things jutsu to make the nine-tailed beast and then put the Geto statue on the moon. The Geto statue, of course, being the husk of the Ten Tails. So technically this husk of the Ten Tails is Kaguya, and that's why Hamura goes to the moon to keep an eye on that. You see, the difference between Hagoromo and Hamura is that Hamura only ever had the Byakugan, at least until he awoke to the Tenseigan. And as the wielder of the Tenseigan, he had all of the abilities that Toneri had. Tenseigan Chakra Cloak, Truth Seeker Orbs, all that. But a common misconception from people who haven't seen Naruto the Last or just simply forgot about it is that Hamura is any really different from Hagoromo. By that I mean Hamura was also able to transcend death, space, and time. Hamura is able to project his consciousness many years after his death to Hinata to transfer his chakra to her so she is able to destroy the Tenseigan. This is no different from what Hagoromo does with Naruto and Sasuke. So while yes, Hagoromo is more likely the more powerful of the two brothers, Hamura is also not to be messed with. By entering a different spiritual plane after death that you can transcend and basically bend reality, that makes you very scary. But unfortunately, Hamura just missed some of the hacks that Hagoromo ended up with, like creation of all things, which is basically how Izanami and Izanagi were created. But we'll cover those much later. Up next, we have an entry that I don't feel great about. I think post-death Hamura deserves more respect, but it's hard for me to put him above the next entry on the list just based off feats, especially when you consider that Hagoromo was probably doing the majority of the heavy lifting against Kaguya. So the next entry on the list is Kinshiki. So Kinshiki is actually one of the oldest members of the main clan from the Otsutsukis that we know. Essentially, Kinshiki was a lifelong lower-ranked Otsutsuki who actually served as a foster parent to Momoshiki. You see, it's conventional agreed upon that Sasuke and Naruto have gotten stronger in Boruto than they were in the final Valley fight. Now, there's arguments for both sides of this. Naruto still has Sage of Six Paths mode in Boruto. We've seen him use it in his fight against Delta. On top of that, things like Baryon mode and just years of experience in battle have made Naruto stronger than he was. Sasuke has also gotten better with his Rinnegan, but his power-up is also kind of a moot point to me, considering the fact that during the final Valley fight, he had all nine-tailed beasts with him, and that chakra depletion has been a big thing throughout the duration of Boruto for Sasuke. But once again, Sasuke himself has said that he's gotten stronger since the end of Shippuden, and the events of Sasuke Retsudan and a couple other light novels would point in that direction. So the fact that Kinshiki was able to fight this adult Sasuke to a relative stalemate in the beginning of the Boruto movie is a lot of points for Kinshiki. On top of this, you take into account the fact that Kinshiki was able to battle multiple Kage level threats during the final battle scene between Momoshiki, Kinshiki, and the 5 Kage. Not that this generation's Kage are the biggest threat. I mean, Chojuro was there. As for abilities, Kinshiki has the Byakugan like every other Otsutsuki, has shown some of the highest limits of raw strength out of any Otsutsuki we've ever seen, being able to cut down a god tree with one swing of his halberd while he was almost dead. On top of this, Kinshiki can absorb any ninjutsu and transform it into red glowing chakra weapons. He can cloak himself in purple electricity much like Madara, and can use space-time ninjutsu to teleport himself places. The reason that Kinshiki is so high on this list is the fact that he fought toe-to-toe with Sasuke, a Sasuke who might be more powerful than Naruto was in the last, meaning that he's probably stronger than Toneri was in Tenseigan mode, and therefore by extension stronger than Hamura. There's also the fact that he's helped Momoshiki consume at least 9 worlds. I say at least 9 worlds because we've seen Momoshiki's planet and there's 9 god trees growing from it, which would imply to us that Momoshiki has eaten the chakra fruit of 9 planets. But enough about Kinshiki. His biggest contribution to Naruto was fusing with Momoshiki, who is actually next on our list. Yeah, that's right, I didn't say Kaguya. You see, this right here is one of the biggest points of contention in the Naruto community. Who's stronger, Kaguya or Momoshiki? A lot of people will say I stand on the wrong side of history for this, and I would like to preface that I believe believe that a fight between the two of them could go either way any day of the week. But here's my thing. Essentially, the reason that people say Kaguya is weaker than Momoshiki is more or less hearsay. Obviously, yes, there's the fact that Momoshiki has devoured 9 planets. So logic would dictate that 9 is greater than 1. But a large part of Boruto is explaining the fact that not all god trees and not all chakra fruits are equal. Everyone's always talking about how, oh, if I fed Kawaki to the god tree, it wouldn't be as good of a chakra fruit because he's not a full Otsutsuki. And therefore, the strength of the Otsutsuki you're feeding to the 10 tails to make the god tree to make the chakra fruit is very important. On top of that, the amount of chakra leached from said planet in order to feed that chakra fruit is also very important. And mind you, Kaguya ate Earth's chakra fruit, which was fed by Ishiki, who is undoubtedly stronger than Kinshiki. So is it insane to assume that Kaguya's 1 chakra fruit is stronger than Momoshiki's 9? I don't believe so, and let's get into why. You see, the reason that people assume that Kaguya is weaker than Momoshiki is cobbled together with a couple of points. One, in Sasuke's light novel, Sasuke said that he would protect the world from a Kaguya level threat. People interpreted this passage as Sasuke saying he could solo a Kaguya level threat. But the way that I see it is it's just Sasuke saying that he would protect the world to the best of his abilities. Here, I'll read the passage to you. The idea that there's a being that could threaten even Kaguya, and it's going to appear in this land, did that mean that the day was coming when the peace they had finally obtained would be disturbed? Was the future people were walking towards now going to be destroyed once more? But Sasuke shook his head no. He wouldn't let it happen. He would protect it himself. Like, that's not Sasuke being like, I can beat Kaguya. As a passage, I feel like it's more trying to convey the fact that Sasuke is now taking pride in protecting the earth. Not that he's comparing his abilities with Kaguya neck and neck. After that, people say that Kaguya was afraid of the Otsutsuki, specifically Momoshiki, Kinshiki, and Urashiki. And this is true, she was. It's why she made the army of white Setsu. But the fact that Kaguya was afraid of repercussions from the Otsutsuki for her eating the chakra fruit doesn't mean she's weaker than them. And also, in a 2v1 or even a 3v1 fight, Kaguya probably would lose. And Kaguya knows that Otsutsukis travel in pairs. On top of this, prior to eating said chakra fruit, Kaguya probably was below those other Otsutsukis in strength. And she hadn't bumped into any of these other Otsutsukis that she hadn't seen in thousands of years to compare whether or not she's stronger than them after eating the fruit. But enough about comparison, let's talk about Momoshiki's abilities. You see, Momoshiki's abilities were incredible. In fact, he claimed he could beat Kaguya by himself, at least the Kaguya that he knew. In fact, Momoshiki's powers were so substantial, he showed the ability to blow away entire planets. Well, at least extinct entire planets. 9 or so to be exact, but the thing is, Momoshiki actually admits in the Boruto light novel number 3 that the level of civilization on these planets was quite low. Momoshiki is able to fight off the 5 Kage, Sasuke, and Boruto, and after he fused with Kinshiki, he was able to fight off Naruto and Sasuke at the peak of their powers, at least for a little bit. I mean, fusing with Kinshiki drastically improved Momoshiki's power. He was able to defeat Gaara, Koritsuchi, Chojuro, and Darui all in 1 strike each. But outside of Gaara, that's not really saying much. In the anime, in his taijutsu fight against Naruto, he actually shows off Gentle Fist, targeting Naruto's Tenketsu points in vital organs. And this is because, like every other Otsutsuki, he had a Byakugan. But on top of that, he also had a Rinnegan. But his Rinnegan were actually in his palms. And with these Rinnegan, he could absorb any ninjutsu with his right palm and release them at a heightened power with his left. And with his right Rinnegan, he can also turn people into chakra pills that he can eat to extend his youth and increase his power. After absorbing Kinshiki, the Rinnegan in his hands turn yellow, and he actually gets another one in his forehead. And at this point, he's able to make black chakra receivers. Absorbing Kinshiki gives him something else as well, the ability to make Kinshiki's red glowing weapons. And because Momoshiki technically has the ability to absorb any ninjutsu and fire it back, he has all nature transformations. So all in all, he is an incredibly intimidating foe. Here's my thing, Momoshiki dies. Momoshiki is killed by Naruto and Sasuke, and Boruto, I guess. Not sealed, not sent away, doesn't retreat, he dies. And that's saying something. And people can be like, oh, well, yeah, but they needed hacks to beat Momoshiki. No, they didn't. Naruto and Sasuke beat down a fused Momoshiki until the scientist dude threw a bunch of extra jutsus at Momoshiki and saved his life. They then had to beat Momoshiki again. Yes, Momoshiki is powerful, but to say he's stronger than Naruto and Sasuke is just not true. Now, you know who was stronger than Naruto and Sasuke? Kaguya. And yes, obviously, Naruto and Sasuke and Boruto are about 2.5 times stronger than they were in the war arc. But you know who else was there in the fight against Kaguya? DMS Kakashi, who has the strongest Susanoo of all times and a strength of 100 Seal Sakura. You are deluding yourself if you think strength of 100 Seal Sakura or DMS Kakashi are not stronger than any of the 5 Kage that were present in the fight against Momoshiki. War Arc Sakura is a high diff win against Gaara at best, and I mean at best for Gaara. You see, Kaguya didn't die against Naruto or Sasuke. Kaguya was sealed, and you want to know how they sealed Kaguya? Well, it's pretty simple. All Naruto and Sasuke had to do was touch her simultaneously, and then Hagoromo used the Sun and Moon seal to seal her in a moon in her own dimension. So in reality, it was actually DMS Kakashi, Sakura, Naruto, Sasuke, and Hagoromo. And I don't know if you guys have noticed yet, but Hagoromo hasn't come up on the list yet. That's for a reason of its own. You see, Kaguya was always strong, but after consuming the chakra fruit, she got a myriad of new abilities. I mean, she hadn't eaten the chakra fruit when she ripped Ishiki in half, although that was a surprise attack. Kaguya was so powerful that after eating the chakra fruit, she was able to pacify the entire world, which was stuck in the middle of a war-torn era. In fact, she pacified them so well, they revered her as a god. Hagoromo praised her as the mightiest person on Earth, saying that her might was greater than both his and Hamura's combined. Remember, it took Hagoromo and Hamura months to seal her, because just like Naruto and Sasuke, they did not kill her. Kaguya was the first person on Earth to wield chakra, which gives her the ability to absorb any jutsu used against her. And if Kaguya makes contact with you, she can halt all of your movements and absorb your chakra. Not to mention that she is canonically the speed of light. She has the highest healing factor we've ever seen on an Otsutsuki, being able to regrow entire limbs quickly. She can travel between dimensions freely, quickly, and easily. Her 80 Gods vacuum attack, which forms chakra fists around her hands, allows her to crush complete Susanos, and her hair can extend like needles like Jiraiya that also goes straight through complete Susanos. Her Ashal killing bone disintegrates anything it penetrates. And she has an ability called the Expansive Truth Seeker Ball, which houses every chakra nature, and therefore can be used to destroy an entire world and then recreate it. Yes, Kaguya not only has the ability to destroy worlds, she can create new ones. On top of this, Kaguya has the only ever Rinne Sharingan. Yeah, that's right, nobody else in the show has ever awoken a Rinne Sharingan. Not Hagoromo, not Momoshiki, not Toneri, not Sasuke. Sasuke has a 6-tome Rinnegan, it's different, somehow. But this Rinne Sharingan gives Kaguya the abilities of a Sharingan, allowing her to track movement and chakra, which she didn't really need because she already has a Byakugan, 2 to be exact. And this Rinne Sharingan allows her to put people in infinite Tsukiyomi and travel between dimensions instantaneously. Yes, there is evidence that Momoshiki is stronger than Kaguya, but I also believe there is stronger, more important evidence that Kaguya is stronger than Momoshiki. But at the end of the day, I believe it's a coin flip, and I just like Momoshiki less than I like Kaguya. And next up, pseudo finally, we have Ishiki. Now, Ishiki is undoubtedly the strongest Otsutsuki we've ever seen. Sorta. We'll explain in a minute. Ishiki came to the Earth thousands of years ago with Kaguya, and as the higher ranked Otsutsuki, the plan was to feed Kaguya to the Ten Tails in order to grow the god tree. But Kaguya was sick of being fed to the Ten Tails, and honestly, who can blame her? So she jumped Ishiki and actually fed his legs to the Ten Tails. Maybe. Once again, just the theory. Ishiki then kind of had to crawl away in order not to die, and eventually found Jigen, a monk, who he shrunk himself down and decided to live in the brain of. He then spent the next hundreds to thousands of years A, recuperating, and B, trying to get a karma marking on somebody. That somebody ended up being both Code and Kawaki. But Code was the recipient of a white karma marking, meaning that Code cannot bring Ishiki back to life, but he does still have all of Ishiki's abilities. But Kawaki can be used. Now, why do we know that Ishiki is much more powerful than any other Otsutsuki we've ever seen? Well, feats mostly. Jigen's body, which was heavily augmented by Amado to encapsulate the sheer power of Ishiki, wasn't enough to show off Ishiki's full might. Essentially meaning that while Ishiki was in Jigen, he was limited, which was insane because Jigen was incredibly powerful. So powerful, he ran Naruto and Sasuke's fade like it was nothing, really. Both Naruto and Sasuke had to be brought back from the brink of death by Sakura. Amado explained to Naruto and Sasuke that if Ishiki's powers were let loose, he could destroy the world and nobody could really stop him. Jigen, even while heavily weakened after his fight against Sasuke and Naruto, was able to go toe-to-toe with Kashin Koji, who was a clone of Jiraiya, except the difference between him and Jiraiya is that he's a perfect sage. And I'll remind you that Jiraiya, in the pseudo kind of past, managed to kill Urashiki basically by himself. I mean, Jigen was so powerful, he literally snatched Sasuke out of a perfect Susanoo. He sealed a Jin Cloak Naruto like it was nothing. Naruto had to use Baryon mode, which was the colliding of his and Kurama's chakra together to make a new form of energy in order to occupy Ishiki long enough for Ishiki to die. You see, the only reason that Ishiki lost to Baryon mode Naruto is because the collision of these two chakras and the destruction of said chakra was kind of bad for Ishiki. Essentially, since chakra was being destroyed in Baryon mode and all chakra is connected, a connected punch between Naruto and Ishiki would actually destroy some of Ishiki's chakra. And Ishiki didn't have long to live. In fact, he only had a couple of days. So every punch from Naruto shortened Ishiki's life. And if Ishiki didn't only have 3 days to live, this wouldn't have been a problem for him. He would have just lived a week less, but he still would have been able to defeat Naruto. But instead, because of the time constraint on his life, Naruto was able to win. And that cost him Kurama. Not to mention, Sasuke got absolutely ragdolled. But why is Ishiki so powerful? What are his abilities? Well, like a lot of other Otsutsukis, he's able to use space-time ninjutsu. Essentially, Ishiki has his own dimension. And in this dimension, he was able to keep a Fuin jutsu so powerful he could seal Naruto. But Ishiki's true ability came in his dojutsu, specifically the dojutsu in his right eye. With Ishiki's right eye, he could perform a jutsu called Sakuno Hikona, an ability that allowed him to shrink himself or any non-living object instantly to either half its original size or literally microscopic, but he can also unshrink said objects. He also has an ability called Daikokuten, which allows him to store said shrunken objects in his own personal dimensional pocket, where he can just put you forever. Well, not you because you're a living object, but like a glass of wine. And he could pull these objects out of this dimensional pocket and put them wherever he wants. And after he pulls them out of the dimensional pocket, he can return them to their original size, which allowed him to fire massive black rod receivers at people that they couldn't perceive because he can just summon them in you. And on top of all this, in his left eye, he has a Byakugan. While Ishiki's abilities may seem less complicated than the other Otsutsukis on this list, his feats alone point him as the top Otsutsuki we've ever seen. I mean, he's so obviously stronger than Momoshiki, because Momoshiki lost to the people Ishiki ragdolled. But I would love to see a fight between him and post-chakra fruit Kaguya. I think it would be very interesting. Now, I know what you're thinking. We're missing somebody on this list. And you're right, we are. And it's somebody we've been talking about the entire video. That person is Hagoromo. And I know what you're saying, Nick, there's no way Hagoromo is stronger than Ishiki. He's literally the son of Kaguya who's weaker. And that's fair, except I'm not talking about living Hagoromo. No, I'm talking about post-death Hagoromo, which is why this entry has a small caveat. Obviously, Hagoromo after his death isn't gonna go off and fight anybody. We don't even know if he has a corporeal form, but there are a few things about the way that post-death Hagoromo is set up that make me believe he could be the strongest Otsutsuki ever. I mean, he is technically referred to as the god of shinobi, and I think that's for a reason. You see, Hagoromo, like many other Otsutsuki, has Rinnegan, except after death, he has 3. A red one in his forehead and 2 purple ones in his eyes. And since all Rinnegan abilities are derived from Hagoromo, in that the only way that humans can achieve a Rinnegan is by getting Ashura and Indra's chakra together and thus getting Hagoromo's chakra, we can assume that Hagoromo has access to all 6 paths of pain, limbo, clones, and everything else. I mean, if every single ability is founded from him, why shouldn't he have access to them? Not to mention that his Shibuka Tensei was able to seal Kaguya. And I'll remind you what Shibuka Tensei is. Essentially, it's a sealing jutsu done with the Rinnegan that seals somebody in a gravitational well that pulls all the earth around them to make a giant sphere. Essentially, you make somebody a pseudo black hole that pulls in all the matter around them to seal them in a big old rock. Only thing is, Hagoromo's Shibuka Tensei made the moon. And while Hamura did help, I will once again remind you that Shibuka Tensei is a Rinnegan ability, meaning that even though Hamura probably was helping, it was mostly Hagoromo that sealed Kaguya. Twice, mind you. But the true strongest thing that Hagoromo has access to is creation of all things jutsu. You see, this is why he's referred to as the god of shinobi, because like most gods, he can create whatever he wants. If Hagoromo has enough chakra, he can make anything he needs. He was able to project an image in his mind of the tailed beast and use the 10-tailed chakra in order to create them. Not to mention that Izanagi and Izanami are both based off the creation of all things jutsu. Essentially, by blinding an eye, you are able to tap into creation of all things. beings, which allows, in the case of Izanagi, a user to rewrite reality, essentially erasing your body, which is about to die, and creating a new one somewhere that's safe. But Izanagi actually isn't limited to just saving yourself from Susanoo arrows. You can bend anything in reality around you for a minute, or any amount of time depending on how much chakra you have or how much of Indra and Ashura's chakra you have. But here's the thing, he wouldn't go blind from using creation of all things jutsu, meaning that technically he has infinite access to reality bending, as long as he has enough chakra. And not to mention, like earlier when I said that Hamura was able to transcend death, space, and time in order to talk to Hinata, Hagoromo was also able to transcend death, space, and time to talk to Naruto and Sasuke separately, simultaneously. He is then able to give away chakra because he is technically a pure chakra being, meaning that his chakra is woven into reality, and he is a true multiversal being, because he technically both resides on Earth and the Pure Lands simultaneously, and he is able to siphon infinite chakra from the Pure Lands to people on Earth. He's able to summon all of the Kage from previous generations to help him summon Naruto and Sasuke back from Kaguya's dimension. So while technically you can't really fight Hagoromo because he technically doesn't exist, he's kind of like a chakra ghost, his abilities technically make him immortal and unbeatable. So would he beat Ishiki in a fight? I mean, maybe. Technically, Ishiki wouldn't be able to injure him, A, on account of the no corporeal form thing, and B, on the account of creation of all things. But it feels like a caveat because it was only ever achieved after he's dead, and he's more of a concept than he is a person. So he's one with an asterisk. Woo! And that's it. That is all the Otsutsukis explained and ranked. That went much longer than I anticipated. But I hope you found it informational and interesting. And if you did, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you really feel like supporting me in my endeavor to keep you informed and entertained, guys, please follow my other page, NC Gamer 23, where I play video games. Listen, technically this entire list is null and void because we know an Otsutsuki god exists that's literally just comprised of Jogons, so that's actually probably the real strongest Otsutsuki, but we haven't even really seen whether or not it truly exists yet.